Sad Kundal.
I've never met you. I'm sad that I've never met you.
Aw, thank you. I'm glad we're meeting here today.
This is, I mean, it seems, I don't know why I've never met you. It was probably too many years out west and cheap budgets from Gary Slade, who wouldn't permit me to go to Canadian Music Week to go and, meet superstars like you.
Oh, thank you. He made people pay for photocopies. So, I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. And that was a big change when I moved over from Rogers for that 1 year from 03 to 04. It's like, you guys have no swag. We've moved to number one and you got nothing to give out that has our call sign on it. It's just, coming from the big blue machine, Rogers and CHFI, and then saying, come on, let's do this. But yeah.
I do my research. This is my show prep. It looks exactly the same way that I used to do show prep.
I love it. I love it. There's something so, literally cerebral about putting your pen in your hand and writing it down. It just commits it to the brain so much better, I think.
What made you decide to go to Loyalist?
Proximity and just sheer luck. I was in grade 13. Yes, we had extra grades there. I don't know if it helped, but I was in April of grade 13, not an exceptional student. I did well in theater and in English and French, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I signed up. Remember these career days schools used to have? You go and listen to a bunch of people talk. And I got there and the two guys I had signed up to listen to were already full. So I ended up hearing this Brian Olney guy from Loyalist College talk about radio. And I was sitting in that class, and it was one of 3 times in my life I felt like I was hit by lightning. Right away, I thought, this is great. I didn't know I could do this. Women on the radio at that time in 1980, Matt, were doing things like Recipes or the Stork Report, where they talked about what babies had been born and stuff, CJBQ in Belleville. And all of a sudden I knew. So I contacted the college and they said, oh, we're full up. And then I did a demo and they found a spot. So I was on the air being paid by November of that year, like 2 months later. So it was like, off I went.
And you did the 2 years at Loyalist, and then you got your first taste of radio shortly after, I want to say CIGL.
Well, it was during, because in November, like 2 months after starting the course, I was hired at CIGL. It was a station for my parents, and it was, like orchestra versions of songs that, were already 30 years old. Music, basically. And so it was running reel-to-reel tapes with an LP cut at the end of each quarter, the Cala music system, it was called, out of Kalamazoo, Michigan. And so I'm not technically minded. So there were times that reel got put on backwards at 6 a.m. when I wasn't awake. But I was doing weekends the first year. And then the second year, I went college in the morning, CIGL from 2 till 8 in the afternoon, evening. And a few evenings I would run across the street to the French restaurant and play piano to make $17 an hour in 1982, which was amazing money for a kid. I wasn't old enough to drink, but that didn't stop me because I was 17 when I started college. So it was a very busy time, but getting my big step was into radio in Ottawa at CFRA. And the Christmas of 1981, I had a week off, so I volunteered to go and work there. And of course, every radio station at Christmas is dying for warm bodies to come and do anything. So I just jumped in, got my feet wet, and then when I graduated 4 months later, they had a job for me.
Wow. So I didn't know about the CFRA part.
Yes.
And that's one of the stations of my youth.
You're kidding. Listening or working?
Listening. I was 11 years old, and people like Dave 50,000 Watts and
oh yeah, Ken the General Grant,
who just recently passed away. That's forward ho with the marching bands every morning.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow. That's what a signal. What a station. What a place to start.
It was. And you know what? I got spoiled. I was only there 6 months before CKLW wined and dined me to go to Windsor. But I was there for 6 months and I thought, number one station, huge market. This is fun. I think I'll do this the rest of my life. Not knowing that a number one station is like a kiss from the gods and it doesn't happen very often.
And both stations are owned by Chum, I believe, correct?
It wasn't then. CFRA wasn't part of Chum then. CFGO in Ottawa was at that time. Of course, you listened to them, the AM rocker. But no, I forget who they were owned by. But it was, I think local. Yeah.
Okay.
And,
Well, you were,
yeah.
and then being
I never
blinded-
worked for Chum.
Oh,
Nope, never did.
I don't know whether or not to say that's good or bad.
I wished, man, when I was doing all news in Toronto, eventually, I would have given my right arm to go to Chum. But of course, they were just starting up their sort of Roger and Marilyn kind of era then. And so I was always pestering Gary Slate and almost got my foot in a few times, but never did. So I'm really jumping ahead here because I was 3.5 years at CKO after CKLW, the Big Eight, decided to go music of your ex-wife and just kind of give up on rock. And then they closed the doors. They shuttered their Southfield, Michigan offices. They shut down, most of the staff on CKLW. So I felt, okay, great. Take the 401, go to Toronto, stay with your sister, find a job. And I did at the All News Network, CKO.
Which we're going to have to explain to everybody.
We are.
Because CKO was a news network across the country. That's a signal that I could pick up out of Ottawa, but they also had stations in Vancouver and elsewhere.
Calgary, yeah. Yeah.
So why did it fail?
Because it didn't have the money. They were owned by Agra Industries, I think it was, famous for potato chips or something. I don't know. But we didn't have CBC money. We just didn't have the resources. People at CKO, and I say this with the greatest respect and for some disdain, because they were either on their way up or on their way down. And there was just a ton of misogyny and pettiness and that sort of thing. But it was the place where I was given the morning show co-host position. And there was it was a wheel of co-hosts all the time there. They'll try this guy, they'll try that guy. And they all came in thinking, okay, I'm going to save the show, little lady. Sit back. I'll do all the interviews. And it was a real learning experience. But Matt, the best thing I got out of it was a husband I'm still with, 1986. You do the math. I don't know, 37 years later. So it worked out for the best for us.
Was that a national show or was it local?
Local. It was local Toronto. Yep. You gotta listen to talk. You gotta listen to talk. CKO. They had jingles, but
I mean,
they didn't listen.
News, though, has never been anything that companies could monetize. It's never been profitable.
They
Anyhow.
did talk shows. They had John Gilbert,
Yeah.
who was a real somebody on Chum back in the day. And they had a few other syndicated shows across the country. So, yeah, they did national shows. But, yeah, they couldn't monetize. And there was some really good talent there, too. You're talking about Taylor Parnaby, who ran News Radio, I think, and then came to CKO and then ended up his career with Standard/Slate and all of that at CFRB. He was exceptional. And there were a few other people, Bob Holliday, who also came from, I want to say Chum, it might have been CFTR, but he had a storied career as well. There were people who had real talent and a lot of experience, and I learned so much from them, but I didn't get to work closely enough with them to really kind of take it all in. But it was Hap Parnaby who hired me there.
I remember the demise of the station because somebody had finished their newscast and then announced, and the CKO network will cease to exist as of now.
Wow.
And then the static hit the air. I was like, did that really happen?
Well, we were 99.1 on the dial, which of course now is CBC. And I remember somebody telling me, I had left at this time. Rob and I both left a year earlier. I got a phone call in August of 1988, the same year Rob and I married. So it was a big year for us. And I got a phone call from CFRB to come and do news on the Wally Crowder show, and CHFI to come and do news on the Don Daynard show. And so I had this decision to make. They were both going to pay exactly $40,000. And you know what? I later learned that Slate had a rule. No woman was to be paid more than $40,000, and Maureen Holloway broke that ceiling. But I had to decide, which one did I want? Did I want to go to the station where my dad would be really thrilled, or go to a station where I'd have fun? And so I chose CHFI, and I'm really glad that I did. But you're right. A year later, the station, the plug got pulled. I got a call, not an email, of course. Somebody messaged me and said, I had sent my car away for servicing, and when I got it back, it was just this static. And I thought, what did they do to the radio stations? There were people who had no idea.
Tell me about the late 80s working with Don. What was your role on the show? Was it just news, or did it morph into something over time?
Oh, it totally morphed. For the first 3 years, I guess, I, along with Ben Steinfeld, who had come from CFTR, we sat in the newsroom together, smoking away. I can't even believe that there were ashtrays next to our IBM Selectrics, but there were. And writing news. He did the top hours. I went in and did the bottom hours, but I would stick around to do a bit or two with Daynard. And eventually it got to the point where it was really clicking. And what's funny is when I started there, we were the station's demographic. I was 25. He was 54. So we covered it all, right? And some of the stuff he talked about, I had no idea. I grew up spending a lot of time with my grandparents, so I knew a lot of stuff about the 30s and the 40s and that. But he was in a whole different realm. He was in his world of serial dramas in the theaters on the weekends and cowboy movies and all of these things. And, of course, oldies. Don was steeped in oldies. That was really his brand. But I brought in the younger, the moms, the females, basically, because he didn't really care about that side of the audience. And so we just gelled. And then eventually I just kind of asked him one day, is it okay if I have co-host printed on my business card? And he was in a good mood that day. And he said, yeah, sure, I don't care. So I went ahead and did it. And then in 1991, when we were expecting our baby, my husband suggested, let's do it from home. He had come from a network where Charles Templeton and Pierre Burton had done their things on CKEY from home every morning, their commentary. And he knew this could be done. So I did my part of the show from home for 3 months. And some people didn't know that I wasn't in the studio. The quality was just that good. But then they thought, well, she can't be doing the news from home. That's stupid. So I moved out of news then. They brought somebody else in, and away we went.
What was the technology?
Bell lines buried under the front lawn. And Lauren came 3 weeks early, so they hadn't had the lines put in yet. And I had said to John Hinnon, the news director at the time, we got to do this. Let's get this going. Come on, let's go. But, budgets and giving money to Bell was just, they couldn't stand it. But that was the technology, Matt. And now, of course, anybody can do shows from anywhere. I'm in a converted wine room in our house. So the alcohol that would have cost me my career is now giving it back to me here in a whole different form. Yeah, it's amazing, the technology, huh?
I can't believe how far we've come.
Yeah.
I mean, those ISDN lines that you're talking about were the gold standard for sound for so long. And, for a brief time, we had some other computer type stuff. And then eventually, the internet has caught up with everything else. And, oh, look, it's now Wi-Fi.
Yeah. Yeah, it's amazing.
What did you learn from Don as a communicator? Because Don Daynard was told, it was just sort of a given that that's number one and established. But I didn't get to listen to him. So what did he have as a communicator that you picked up on?
He had such a gift, and it was incredible because the things I learned from him was not to take myself so damn seriously. And I always thought as a news person, and I took my news very seriously too, but I took my sports more seriously. I would write that sportscast first because I wasn't going to be that girl on the radio who made the mistakes. I did still, but I always wrote the sports first. I learned from him not to take myself so seriously, to laugh more, to let yourself just get lost in the moment of the absolute absurdity. And he was so good at that. And people just loved when he went off the rails and was wheezing that he was laughing so hard. And I never did that. I couldn't do that. I didn't do it until Mike Cooper, years later. But I was always so, stick up my butt because I felt like I was carrying all of femininity on my shoulders. And I'll give you an example. He used to do this bit with Gene Taylor, who came from years on City TV, and it was called Taylor's Trivia. And Gene would ask Don a question, and Don would come up with this answer, and it would usually be absurd and wrong. And it'd be very funny. It was a funny bit, 7:20 every morning. Benchmarks were everything then. And when away, eventually I earned the right, the privilege to do Taylor's Trivia. And the program director at the time, himself just a real misogynist as well, he said, listen, why don't you play along more with Taylor? Why don't you get some of them wrong? And I said, I can't do that. I couldn't play the dumb co-host. And, I just couldn't. But Don sort of taught me it was okay to play a role, to be the goof, and to let people kind of take the piss, as you will, as the Brits say. You have fun at your expense, and just kind of go with it. Now, he was the most real person I'd ever experienced on the radio. When Don wasn't in a good mood, everybody in the room knew it, and quite often the listeners did too. So my job, and I later found out he would call me Miss Perky Pants, or Perky Panties, I think it was to lighten it up and to go, oh, Don, and then kind of change directions. And of course, he hated that. But that was my job, was to keep listeners and to make them not turn away from the cranky guy. Because as endearing as it was, he got unhappier as years went on. And either it was, me having this constantly perky presence, or, losing his son as he did. And came out publicly about it, and divorces and all of the crap that life threw at him, and I would come in some mornings and he would just have his face buried in the newspaper, and our newscaster at the time, my dear friend and podcast partner now, Lisa Brandt, would say, I just knew that was a time not to talk to Don. And okay, so other people saw it too, thank God it wasn't just me.
Who else in the Toronto market could you hear on the radio, females who are also, being elevated or elevating themselves and having to work through the system, that you could hear and going, good, there's more females coming on air?
I never really got a chance to listen to people like Sheila Rogers. She was doing the co-host thing at the same time I was. And of course, Marilyn Dennis. I only ever heard her once or twice. And the one time I heard her, and I heard her talk to a listener on the phone and say, okay, hon, so blah, blah, blah. And I went, wait a second. She just talked to that caller like they were her friend. You can do that. And so it opened my eyes that, again, another thing broken down. Like, stop with the walls. Stop trying to be this person and just be yourself. And that one break that I heard Marilyn do taught me that. And so I learned more from the wisdom of Valerie Geller, who is still a tremendous, consultant. Consultant has such a dirty C word, kind of an air to it. But in Valerie's case, she was that other time. I talked three, but another time that I was hit by lightning was the first time I heard Valerie Geller talk. So she taught me how to just be myself and allow myself to be human. And, that's a hard thing, especially now when people come at you so hard if you make a mistake while you're being human. And it happens because it's part of the being human mess.
I'm so glad you mentioned her, because she has referenced you on a number of occasions with I think in the podcast that I did.
Yeah.
with her. And right now I'm just going to put you to the test. What are her 3 big rules?
Never be boring is
Yep.
the last one. Keep it interesting.
Tell the truth.
Tell the truth.
Never be boring. Make it
And
matter.
Make it matter. You
Yeah.
know, and although those 3 rules didn't come to the top of my mind, what she says comes to me all the time, always what's in it for the listener, but to turn it around and not to say, I was in the supermarket or I was in the store today and this woman, sneezed all over me. What you do is you say, has this ever happened to you? Or what would you have done? And right away you're pulling in the listener because they're going, oh, I should think about this, right? It's not just me, this is what happened to me, and let's go to a commercial. She is so good. God, she's good.
When was the first time you met her?
They brought her in I think about 1994 or 5, I want to say. Dawn and I ended up our time together in 99. So we were together for 11 years. And it was in the middle of that. And, Dawn was one of these guys, sitting back, arms folded. You can't teach me anything, lady. But I was just soaking it all in because she saw me. She heard me. She got me. And it was the first time anyone in my career had ever gotten me or saw what I could do or the potential. And boy, oh boy, is that ever an amazing feeling if you ever get that. It's just, what was your dealing with her, Matt? Did you have her in a consultant form as well?
I was actually Standard flew her in and spoke with a number of us. So I got to fly to Toronto, and it was, I think, as talent at the time, and discuss some breaks with her that I was doing. And I brought them on cassette, and she'd already listened to the show anyway. And I think she wanted me to land on the answer in the end about to why a certain break didn't work. And I think she had to look me square in the eyes and ask, were you boring? And it wasn't just that the break was boring.
Right.
It's just that, could you have made it a little bit more? And, were you boring in this particular instance? And I thought, yeah, maybe I could have done it better, and what's in it for the listener, and reshaped it. And we just reshaped the break into something that was very, very mediocre, into something that popped.
Yeah.
And how simple it was just to use the word you, to make it about the listener, to not, make it a little bit about myself, and to really include the listener. And by just changing a few words, we took something from mediocre and bland to great.
Isn't that amazing?
It was.
She is so gifted, and how lucky we've been. And this is a woman now who's schooling people in podcasting, because being a good communicator, it doesn't matter whether you're making announcements somewhere or, you're on the air or you're doing a podcast. It's all that connection that people, I think, will always crave. And this is part of what radio has just thrown away by doing syndicated morning shows and, all of this, putting television people on radio, and people who don't get that one-to-one, like, hey, everybody, or good morning, everybody, or how are you all doing? No. That was the one thing, right, Matt? It's one person. And especially in the morning, they're sitting there, they're having a coffee, they're waking up looking at somebody they can't stand, or going to a job that they abhor, and they're literally naked coming out of the shower. They're thinking, how do I get through this day? And that's why Make It Matter is my world safe. That's one of her things too, is let people know it's going to be okay. And if it's not okay, it will be. And here's how you do it. So it's just the wrapping yourself around that listener and caring. And you can fake it, but I've been so lucky I've never had to fake it. I really do care. And to this day, well, you've seen the following that I still have. And it's not so much a following as a mutual connection, because I feel for them as well.
I had the one break with Valerie, and then I just got the book, and then that finished out the rest for me, because everything else was in the book, and it was perfect.
Yeah.
I think back to your time in the early 90s, and you're writing the sports first thing in the morning, because you've got to make that matter, and you've got to get it right, and you've got to tell the truth. Early 90s sports in Toronto.
Whoa.
Oh my goodness. The Blue Jays.
Yep.
The Toronto Maple Leafs nearly got to the Stanley Cup
93.
final in 93.
Yep.
I can tell you're a Leafs fan because you still speak of that fondly.
Gilmore.
I will remind you the Montreal Canadiens won the Cup that year.
Oh, probably. Paul DeCourcy was in our newsroom, and he was an avid Habs fan. So, yeah.
Yeah, but some of those parts that we talk about, they feel gone, and especially getting it right. Well, certainly telling the truth. In some capacities of news, that can be gone on talk shows.
Yeah, of course.
Making it, and for some reason, we've gotten away from the listener in radio. And how did that happen? I think you might have already touched on it by mentioning the syndicated shows.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I used to hear about this even back then. Oh, it's the bean counters. And, I never really quite understood that, but I understand it. When you've got communication conglomerates who couldn't give a fly. Tribute there to Bob McCowan, dear Bob, a friend of ours, and that was his thing, Fadu. But they couldn't care less about the quality of what was going out on the air. I mean, Rogers had it in the DNA. Ted Rogers was broadcasting long before television or communications or anything like that. But yeah, radio was his thing. And, Edward now is like, okay, how are we going to get CHFI back to number one? Well, ask somebody who knows, for starters, instead of bringing all of these, people coming in who are they're making decisions that are just so ridiculous. What was the question? Because my head is spinning now, Matt. I'm sorry. But okay, the bean counters. And it came down to how much is this person costing? How can we do it more cheaply? And of course, they do have fewer advertisers, but I'm thinking, and follow me here and tell me where my logic is wrong. If they had treated the medium with the respect that it deserved and moved along with the times, which I think stations like KISS are doing their podcasts for their morning show and that sort of thing. But if they had done that, then they wouldn't be dying. And I think it's a slow suicide. They're doing it. We saw it happen in the States where one station or one company took over all these stations, and it's just syndicated garbage, basically. So we can all hear Ryan Seacrest say, "Good morning, everybody," and not give a damn what is happening in your town today where a train derailed or anything like that. I could go off forever on this. It's so sad because I love radio with every fiber of my being.
Yeah, you had it right. It's Ryan Seacrest saying, "Good morning, everybody," followed by what Kim Kardashian did yesterday.
Oh. Sorry. There's room for that, and now there are platforms for that. Go get your fill on TikTok and stuff, but make radio real and relevant and connected again if it's not too late.
It was a transition after Don, after he retired in '99.
It should have worked. Bob McGee came from mornings at 1050 Chum. Handsome. Oh, he was beautiful. He was a lovely man. Bob always did the right thing. If there was a birthday or whatever, there were flowers. He was the most gracious gentleman to me. He had a very public breakup with Jeannie Becker, and her book came out while he and I were together. And he was a good person, but he was afraid. He was so nervous. He would shake when he was on the air. So he didn't have that confidence to helm a morning show, and coming in after Daynard, nobody could fill those cowboy boots. McGee, and I am sure I was at fault, but we did not have the magic, the chemistry, that je ne sais quoi. And because I didn't have that net, knowing that if I leapt, was it going to be okay? And he didn't have that with me either. We were both, I think, afraid. Management didn't know what to do. Our program director didn't know what to do to make the show better because he'd never had to. Daynard wouldn't listen to anybody. He resented bosses of all kinds, which was, to me, something else I learned. It was just like I was totally raised on authoritarian figures. My father was an officer in the Air Force, yada, yada, yada. And so Don didn't give a shit, basically, if I can use that. So management didn't know what to do to help the show. So it eventually, we had solid ratings, but they weren't Daynard and Davis ratings. And so in 2003, they looked down the hall to the morning show there that they had spent literally $1 million promoting recently, Mad Dog and Billy, and it wasn't moving their needle. And they thought, well, and this is a literal turn of phrase used by one of the managers at CHFI, why don't we euthanize CHFI? Euthanize, he thought, I don't know if he was doing the turn of phrase on purpose, but Y-O-U-T-H, youth. And so that's when Bob moved to afternoons. I had in my contract, I only did mornings. And so I was off on the beach for a little bit. And they brought in Mad Dog and Billy.
And shout out to Julie Adam, by the way, who's been on this show.
Yes.
And
I love Julie.
Yeah.
I do.
By the way, she loves you too. But she's taken responsibility for being part of that move. A number of times she just says, yeah, hey, it's okay to make mistakes. I made one once, and she kind of makes reference to being a part of a team that made this decision.
Yeah, it wasn't all her.
No, I know.
A lot of desks had to sign off on that, but she shouldered the responsibility. And one of the things, Matt, when I was told on that June day, June 14th, 2003, but I don't remember, that I wasn't coming in on Monday, is that I really regretted that I wasn't going to work with Julie Adam because she believed in her people. And imagine being able to work for a woman, too, who had such vision and just was all in, such passion for radio. It was, I thought, a real loss, but I got to, so yay.
And that's why I didn't meet you, because in 2003, I did go to Canadian Music Week, but you were on the beach.
Yes, I was, which is such a nice way of saying drinking your face off in grief. But it's true. You're called on the beach. And I had a year that I was told, you're not to go on the Toronto airwaves and we'll pay you. But I was able to, there were a couple of jobs that came up just out of the blue, a TV show on the W Network live. Unfortunately, it debuted the same day, same time slot as another host with the initials ED, Ellen DeGeneres. I think she did okay. I didn't. And so there was that. And then I got to be in Ross Petty's panto of Cinderella, and I got to play the fairy godmother. And that just, it was amazing. So that's what I did in my year off.
The show on W, was W based out of Winnipeg at that point?
It wasn't. It was right in Toronto.
Okay.
Down at the Chorus. No, Chorus wasn't down at Harbourfront at that time. It was near the bread factory somewhere. My geography's never been good. Lived in Toronto 30 years, Matt, and it might as well have been 3. So, yeah, it was kind of in the west end of Toronto.
And did the non-compete just expire and then you got to go back to radio?
It expired at the time that Easy Rock, which was CJEZ, where I had also worked after I left CKO way back when, they had an opening in the morning show because Mike's co-host was on maternity leave. So I went in to fill in with Mike, and it was like, after the first day, oh, this isn't good. This is amazing. The chemistry, holy crap. I had never worked with anybody like Cooper. He was like nobody I had ever experienced. And I had the chance to work with him because when Bob McGee was brought in, Cooper could have been hired in 99 as my co-host at FI. And my first thought was, no way. I had worked with enough guys who had amazing voices and absolutely nothing up here in my CKO days. So I thought, no, not going to work with Cooper. But holy Hannah, did it ever. I needed, it turns out, kind of a real man's man to, that's such an outdated and sexist phrase, but you know what I mean. I needed a guy who was steeped in testosterone so that I didn't look like the man in the couple. I needed somebody to go up against and come back and go, holy, what was that?
To support your role.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, the way people know you and the way you're comfortable being a broadcaster.
Right, a broadcaster. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like Valerie Geller. There was always that, are you a pitcher or a catcher? I think she had a better turn of phrase for that. But my role always changed. I was always kind of the catcher. And then with Cooper, I became the pitcher. And every day, every break, it would change. And it was so refreshing to be like Shohei Ohtani. What are you going to do today? Where are you going to, kind of shine? Is it going to be at the plate, or is it going to be, so it was just a magical dance.
How good is that? Because I look back at the one time I had a co-host. I did one show. My favorite show I ever did was the pitcher and the catcher. You could change roles, and just going into the role, you could say, I pitch, you catch, or you catch, I pitch.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's the best.
It is. Now, there are some people who are most comfortable in their roles and some people who should never be out of their roles. But if you've got that ability to not just catch it, but to then pitch it back, almost like a volley in tennis, where are you going to hit it? Sometimes you're going to hit the net, but sometimes it's going to be something they hit back even better. Oh, my God, Matt. It's magic. And it is that undefinable chemistry that you cannot look at paper and go, yeah, okay, this is going to work. Let's do this. It just doesn't work.
Was Easy Rock owned by Standard?
Yep.
So Gary Slate finally got you.
He didn't. He got me, as in he hired me, but I don't know how many times I would go in and say, look, when Cooper's co-host comes back, put me in with Wallachin. I can do this again. Meaning that, the audience from CHFI moved like a swarm of bees over to Easy Rock and took it to number one. And then I knew, okay, my job here isn't going to be forever. Christine's going to come back. I understand that. But let me move over to Wallachin, because we had some chemistry just a few times we met. I thought, I can do it with this guy. But Slate couldn't see past his nose. And he really resented that my husband helped me in my negotiating, because I know my strengths. And standing up for myself is not one of them. It never will be. And Rob has been my agent, producer, not producer now. I produce all of my own podcasts. But, he's been the man who was always the catcher, the bass player, the goalie. That's always been Rob's role, to make me show up and shine. And it's how we've worked and how I've remained any kind of relevant my whole life. So the fact that Gary had someone standing up with and for me, he didn't like it at all. And I remember when I went back to CHFI, he said to Sandy Sanderson, he said, okay, they're your problem now. Like, how he saw me as a problem, I never ever knew, because we weren't a problem. We just stood up and said, actually, no, if you want to sign me on for another period, you're gonna have to sign 3 months or sign 6 months. I can't be just at your beck and call. He wasn't used to people who said, no, sorry, that's not how it's going to work for us. Ugh. It's hard to even talk about, because that whole negotiating thing is it's as awful as, and again, here come with the sports analogies, but, if a player goes in, they tell you how awful you are and then try and get you for a lower price. And they tried that with me, and it just didn't work. I said, no, you're either misinformed or lying to me, because none of that happened. So they weren't used to that either.
And you mentioned Sandy Sanderson. So after that, it was the return to Rogers.
Yes. Yeah, back to CHFI, and they brought Cooper with me, and he had to wait it out until the end of October. And so I sat in on the morning show with the afternoon guy, who is still there, Darren Osborne, all these years later at CHFI. And Darren sat in, and then Cooper came at the end of October, and it was like, off we went.
In all those years, we're spanning a couple decades here, but CHFI, those legendary call letters, and all of my trips to Toronto, whether it was an airport or the train station, you get into a cab and CHFI is on the radio. Yeah. Always. Mm-hmm. What made the station so special that it performed so well for so many years, and still does to this day for that matter?
Well, it does. Yeah. Let's see. A combination of really good marketing. They got in bed with some very big people in Tennessee who did high quality commercials, like using stars from WKRP, Gilligan's Island, all of these, Terry Garr, all of these names that the people who listened to CHFI knew, and put us in their orbit. Wow. So there was that. There was effective marketing, money to spend on advertising, attention to the product, the quality of the music and the people on air. And we knew what we were and what we had. And I always felt like I was an ambassador, not just for the station, but for the city. Wherever I went, it was this giant responsibility, but honor to be part of CHFI, and I always called it a family. We treated each other as a family. We did our Christmas Eve show where everybody kind of came together and brought their kids, and we did a show from 6 till midnight. One year, Matt, it was on one of every 2 radios on in the city. And that, I'll never, ever forget that. They can put that in my obituary if anybody cares. So it was a family. And also that knowing that Ted Rogers was just a few floors up. And I don't know. I took it all probably way too seriously, and that's why being fired devastated me, and anything that happened, I just took to heart and became a serial drinker, but that went dark fast. But anyway, it was so much. It was such an honor and such a responsibility because CHFI was Toronto.
Well, you look great and you look healthy. For somebody who's made at least 4 references to their drinking along the way, it doesn't look like it's aged you, and it looks like your body just completely regenerates itself probably after 2 days later?
Oh, no, I'm sober. I've been sober for 4.5 years. Yeah. Second time around. I was sober for 10 years in there too. But yeah, it's no fairy tale. You know what the business cost you and how drinking and partying was a part of the whole culture. When you had a good book, you went out and drank your face off. And, I wanted to fit in with the boys. There were cigars at the end of the night and everything else. So, yeah, there was a lot of that. And of course, not knowing how to deal with the misogyny and not being wanted all the time in the studio where you were doing your very best every day. And it was easier to go in hungover than to face the anger. So, yeah.
Yeah, I felt that the role playing that I had to do on the radio made it difficult for me to be myself at times. Mm-hmm. And so I couldn't wait to have drinks on Friday.
Yeah.
For many, many years. And, I think, by the way, you didn't need a good book because I think the motto was win or lose, we drink the booze.
Right. So true.
Yeah. And so I can certainly see how, I certainly remember that. Yeah. It was definitely something to enable us to get to Monday morning, the next morning, or whatever came next.
Yeah.
2015, 2016. I mean, there's so much that went on in the world. We talked a little bit about misogyny, but you personally, you lost your daughter, and under these horrible circumstances, and at the same time, the world is changing, and at the same time, there's a Me Too movement coming, and so how? I just how did you cope?
I put on that face that you say, to find out that our daughter had died in her sleep while we were about to begin a remote broadcast in Jamaica that morning, that May 11th, 2015. It's just the most bizarre radio story ever because, it tracks. Radio gave me everything. It gave me my husband. My daughter was born almost on the air and, 3 months at home and gurgling in my arms and hearing from mothers later who would start to lactate when Lauren cried on the radio. Dear God. So there was such a connection that she grew up before listeners' ears. And then to find out that morning and then have to leave a ballroom full of people who had gotten up to watch us do a show and then just say, okay, now what? Because Lauren herself was a broadcaster in her own right in Ottawa, so it was already on the news wires and making, Canada AM and that sort of thing. And it's just all so freaking bizarre. She was on maternity leave. She had started, in college in Ottawa, went to CFRA. And then had graduated to doing the new national news. For Christ's sake, she was 23 when she went on mat leave. I mean, just so much promise and potential and talent, and just a wonderful woman and mother, and loved her baby perhaps to death because she was on a drug that we believe stopped her heart, and the drug was to help her to breastfeed, and the breastfeed lobby is so mean and loud and angry that she listened to it all. So I took 1 month off. I didn't know how long I was going to take off. Because you just don't know. And they thought, well, maybe she's never coming back. And that might have been a solution for a normal person. We checked normal at the door a long time ago, Matt. And Cooper had me on the phone. We did a live hit about 2 weeks after Lauren died. And I found myself laughing with him and him laughing. And I went, oh, okay, this is the medicine. Don't disregard this, because you can sit and wish and think and do all of those things for the rest of your life, or you can get back at it. So 1 month to the day after Lauren died, I was back on the show with Mike, and I wasn't myself. My voice was about an octave lower. I was just still climbing out. And I talk about this in my book, Mourning Has Broken, that it felt like being out of air in your tanks at the bottom of the ocean every show and just trying to get up to the surface. And at the end of the show, I would kind of stumble across the street, because we lived in condos on Bloor Street, right across from the radio station, and just kind of undressing on my way to the bedroom and then just kind of collapsing. It's like completely spent because I had given everything that I possibly had. But it brought me back to life. It was like some sort of an IV that gradually, day by day, I was healing and doing it as publicly as people had seen our devastation. So then I thought, okay, if you can't be a good warning, be a good example. And I'm just gonna try and get through this and not show everybody, I'm gonna show you, but just kind of prove not what I was made of, but what can be possible. So hopefully that's what I've done.
So I'm working with a podcast that does deal with grief. And one of the things that comes up constantly is the expectation. And I'm sure you coming back after a month back to radio, I'm sure there must have been a few callers, a few letters, a few notes, a few emails from people saying it's too soon, or telling you at what level, grief should be experienced. And I think you might have even referenced it recently in on Twitter about, the expectation that people have about what level you should be grieving at what point, and, you should be over it by now, or something.
Yeah, that is the greatest mistake, because we have fixes for everything. And we are in this age where if you don't know something, you go to your phone or you ask whatever speaker's listening. So there is no timeline, no GPS, no rules. But part of our upbringing, part of our lives is, Miss Manners says that manners is the ability to not make other people uncomfortable. And your grief makes people uncomfortable, because I don't know if it's like people used to not say cancer out loud, because as if it was contagious, as if you said it, someone might catch it. And when they look at somebody who's got everything and then the rug is pulled out from under their life, they go, holy Hannah, that could happen to me. And it's a very uncomfortable reality. So there's that. You don't want to exploit or explore your grief too publicly. People don't want to know about that. It's just too awful. And so you try and be authentic without being, let's put on a show, the show must go on kind of thing. But really, life must go on. And so we had in our heads a mantra that one day when we reunite with Lauren and our souls come back together, because this was some sort of an agreement that we made. And she says, well, Mom, Dad, what did you do with your life after I left? That we have a damn good answer for her. And to me, that's the only standard I'm going to be held to. Whether people think, coming up this May, it'll be 9 years. And you should be over this by now. You never, ever get over your particular grief. You get through it. And how you get through it is such a completely personal experience. There is something called complicated that you should look into if it's still deeply affecting your life in terrible ways. But other than that, it's everybody's got a story that'll break your heart, as Amanda Marshall sang, and it's so true. And it's just how you deal with it. And I'll take a breath here in a second, but you've hit on something that's so deeply personal and important to me. And it is Viktor Frankl who wrote in Man's Search for Meaning that the only real thing humans can control is how we react to something. You can't control anything. And this is from a doctor, a psychiatrist who was in the death camps in the Holocaust and observed and learned and later taught. The only thing we have control of, Matt, is how we react. It's stoicism at its very most basic.
How did it end for you at CHFI?
Really nicely.
Yeah.
It could have ended better. My dear, sweet partner, Mike Cooper, had to leave the February that I left 2015. His wife, Debbie, was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer, and he wanted to be with her as much as he could, and he was, but he had to leave, and we all got that. And actually, I guess maybe it's becoming a blur now, because then I was partnered with, I have to say his name, Darren B. Lamb, who was just like somebody from outer space who had been beamed into the studio, and I can't say anything about that experience that doesn't make me sound awful, so I just won't. He didn't understand a human interaction or a human experience, or he wouldn't let himself be human on the air. And maybe as time went on with Maureen, I think it got a little bit better, but just the fact that he vanished in thin air, called back to the mothership, tells it all, and left the station in the lurch, and left, Cooper came back to be with Maureen and thought that they were going to save the station when the station decided to do something altogether. I'm so sad for what happened there, but not for me, because Darren, bless him, bless his heart, as they say in the South, he gave me permission to leave because I knew it wasn't fun anymore and it was time to go and explore life outside of radio. So I made my announcement. It's so funny because the great Rogers promotion machine or PR machine, which had nothing to do with radio, we all kind of decided the date it would be announced. And at one point I said, that is the U.S. election. Should we pick another day? I don't know. It'll be fine. And of course, everybody woke up to the news that Trump had won. And so there it is, trending on Twitter. I see breakfast television on the studio TV. It's like Erin, CHFI, and Trump. And I despise him for every reason, but that's not even one of them. I don't care that anything came out the day I announced I was leaving. Who cares about, somebody leaving a radio show when that was happening, crying out loud. Anyway, yes, go on.
Well, I was about to say 2016 as well. There was that pivotal moment, but the Me Too moment, which happened throughout the entire year. And you must be saying to yourself, finally, people are seeing what I've been seeing, not just in the radio business, but across most of the entertainment industry and beyond.
It took me a long time to kind of open my eyes to what I had seen. Because the fact that I begged them in 1999 to say, hey, you know what, I've been doing this show 11 years. Can we make it Erin and Bob? Well, no, it just sounds better, Bob and Erin. And I said, yeah, you're right. It sounds more like Don and Erin. People won't notice a difference. And just the little things that I did to try and say, hey, over here. And the examples of abuse that I cited, and I still have the letter. I don't know why I've kept it. It's in a box of crap from years ago that I wrote saying, please address what's going on in this studio, the way I'm being treated, and that nobody wanted to say anything, least of all me, because at that time, my job was to not upset the apple cart because there were so many other girls they could have brought in to do this job. So I knew I was going to have to tough it out. And so I did. And it's like they say in the golf game, it's that one great shot that keeps you coming back. And there were great shots with Don. We had an amazing partnership at times, but I knew how much he resented me and I think disliked me. for so many of those years. And it was such a father-daughter thing, too. I was so looking for a dad spot in him that he couldn't possibly give me. So, yeah, I was to blame for a small part of it. But the misogyny that I saw around me, like the guy, and I won't name his position because I don't know who he is now, but, groping the receptionist and her kind of disappearing and all of the things that went on. And going on business trips, and his main job, this guy, was to pick up a waitress in the hotel bar or whatever. It was so icky. But what did we know? When I started at CFRA, I was thinking of Ed Needham the other day, the late talk show host. He would call me, who's the frail? The frail. And I didn't even know that was such an antiquated term to refer to a woman. And all of these just, and at CKLW being taken to strip club because I with the rest of the news guys. And I would go along because I needed to fit in. I couldn't be the one who was not one of the boys because I wanted so much to succeed and be a part of it. So anyway, wow, how much is this therapy costing me, Matt?
It's $150.
Okay, thank you.
See Jane to book an appointment again next week.
That's a problem with therapy and people in radio. Nobody gets us. Nobody understands our references or why we're so effed up. And that was a thing that I found one after the other. Once I got over my fear that they would recognize that it was me who was on the radio coming in here and telling them all these stories, they just didn't understand. Well, why didn't you stop doing that? Why didn't you say something to somebody? I can't.
Well, I have a theory that the most successful morning shows are the ones that exist with codependent relationships. And so that sort of baseline of success, of codependency, really sort of spreads that, throughout a radio station between a program director and talent. It's very codependent as opposed to being interdependent. So all of our relationships are dysfunctional. Then you throw in the other stuff, whether it's the misogyny and the sexism and all that stuff. And it's just a witch's brew. By Friday, you might need a beer. You might need a joint. You might need to go to the strip club. You might need to go and, a lot of also acting.
Shopping.
And, playing different roles.
Gambling. Yeah.
So at its root, it's dysfunctional.
I think also that radio attracts broken toys. We are the people who aren't normal. We're the ones who say, hey, look at me. And you have to build up an ego, not only to shield that vast insecurity, but so that when people tell you, you suck, the other one was better, what are you doing there? It doesn't destroy you. So it's really hard. And you see people who are a-holes to listeners, but that's because they had to build that up and they're so used to being told that they're awful that they don't care. But I took it all very personally. I'll tell you, in the middle of November every year, when CHFI turned to all Christmas music, I would get this barrage of phone calls and emails, people so angry that their radio station was playing Burl Ives in November. And I took it personally. That's what a yutz I was. It was just like, please stop. And so I would have a countdown on the wall to when Christmas came. And it wasn't like an advent calendar. It was almost like, we can do this. We can survive this. Because it was awful. What a baby, eh? Too bad for you. Number one station in the city and the country, and you're complaining because people are mad about Christmas music. But that's what happens when you take it all personally, right?
Well, that's the power of radio. People are complaining about a product they're getting for free.
That's right. You have buttons. But what hurt me was that giving them a reason, the button, that was always the thing. Never give them a reason, Matt, right? Don't do anything that might give them a reason to find another station that they maybe liked better. Oh my God, what if they like Marilyn better? Well, of course they do. She's on television. No, don't let them leave.
You mentioned therapy. One of the best methods of therapy is writing, and you wrote a book. What's it like to write a book?
Oh, it was awful. But here's the thing. I had been writing a journal since 2003. So every day I had the discipline of getting that message out. First, it was to 80 people. And I was saying to my husband the other day, thinking, okay, it's been 21 years we're going into of doing this. And it used to be daily, and now it's once a week. Thank God I came to my senses. And I said, how many, is it still worth doing? He said, yeah, there's about 1,200, 1,300 people who read it every time you put it up. So, okay, I'll keep at it. But I had that 10,000 hours that
Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank you, Malcolm Gladwell. All of this, being honest, and all of this is just scrambling my brain right now, Matt. I'm going to need to lie down for an hour afterward. But yeah, Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hours, and I'd had that of my writing. So it turns out, when I announced I was leaving CHFI, Tracy Moore, bless her, on Cityline had me on the show, and I told my story of Lauren dying and going back to radio and what our lives were and how her baby boy was doing and everything. And in the audience that day, and it's the wildest thing, it was the executive editor, publisher of HarperCollins. And she contacted me, and I'd even opened the email for days because I was just so inundated with emails. And it said, we think you have a book in you. And it's like, okay, am I going to do this? My husband, my light, love, strength, and stay, said, no, don't. And one of my sisters says, why does the world need another book about grief? And these, of course, the sisters are the voices in my head anyway. And so I thought that, what can I possibly bring to the table about grief that hasn't been written so much more eloquently numerous times for millennia, or as long as people have been, carving in caves. So then we started to talk about what the book would be. And it morphed into this, not only our story, but things I'd learned. And I was so often contacted by other bereaved parents who told me their experiences. And so I was able to mine some of that, and my own, another sister who knew from grief with the death of her son and the death of a baby. So she had her own experiences. And then I thought, okay, I can put my own voice in this, and people may want to read it because they know me and they knew our story, but did they really know it? So writing it, while people thought, and obviously it's a question that came up a lot during the book tour, was it cathartic? Was it cathartic? The answer should have been yes, but no. Because when you grieve to this extent, to me, I put a cloak on. It was the cloak of grief and shock that protected me and kept me going, kept me facing forward, do a show, get through it, and then just do what you have to do to survive it at home. But going into the book was, I had to ask my husband, okay, what happened that morning when you got the phone call in the hotel lobby? And then I came out from the ballroom asking, where are you? What happened? What did people do? What did the guests say? How did we? Because I had forgotten it all, and that's kind of how I function. I can compartmentalize things really well, and it's how I survive. So writing the book was not cathartic. It was dirty, and I got to the point where Iris, the publisher, said, do you need a ghostwriter? And I went, oh, no. I'm writing this thing. Okay, you've lit a fire. So I did get to writing it. I love deadlines. And I would say, okay, today I'm going to write 1,000 words. And then we're going to go back out and just go through it. And Rob edited. He would do the first edit for me. And he was neck deep in it as well. So it was hard, but ultimately extremely gratifying, because to this day, I still have people saying, I just read your book, or I've given your book to a friend of mine whose son just died. So the message continues, life after loss.
2020, another monumental year on our planet, but you're inducted into the Hall of Fame. Did you get to do that in person, or was that an online event?
Did that happen? Did that really happen, Matt? Because no, it was online, and it was hilarious because I got all made up. I was all ready. I was in front of my camera and stuff, and I was waiting that night for the FedEx to come with the award, and it was going to come, and I was going to shoot something, and then they were going to put it up right away. I don't remember why I had turned it into such a thing, but I sat there like the girl awaiting her date who stood her up on prom night. The the delivery never came. And so I just shot a thank you without holding it. It was so surreal. And it was a moment that didn't happen because I didn't get to do it in front of everybody and just to experience that communally with my peers. It was sad. It was sad. But I'm grateful. God, it looks good on a bio for what it's worth.
It does. I can see you standing there at the front and accepting the award and, 10-minute speeches and all that stuff. And no, it didn't. It was 2020. Damn.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. I didn't even remember that was the year, as a matter of fact. But yeah, it happened. And I don't know. Maybe one day I'll go back and induct somebody else. But who knows? Who knows?
Tell me about podcasting, because I guess, why did you want to start one? What brought you to start one?
I couldn't not.
Yeah.
I couldn't not. I mean, I was doing my journals and then I decided, okay, it's COVID. I'm going to do video journals because we can do this. So I set myself up in an armchair with some lighting and figured out how to use my iPad as a prompter behind my computer camera and started doing that just to connect with people and let them know, okay, we're all still together. We're here. And then, I don't know, I'm trying to think. I think the first one I did was for Schlegel Village's retirement homes, and it was called Elder Wisdom, and it still continues. Kathy Buckworth, who is on AM 740, she's Zoomer Radio. She's doing it now because we did it for 2 years and kind of stepped away. But it was a podcast with a co-host in his 80s who lived there, and then just the shared experiences, the stories that never get told. I mean, on paper, it sounds like, oh, this is going to be a dud. But once you get great producers who prep all these people, and anyway, that was the first one. And then the Canadian Real Estate Association reached out to me and said, we're going to do a podcast. Would you like to host it? Because I'd already been doing live events, emceeing for them. And I said, sure. So that has turned out to be a really great thing. And this year we're doing 100% video. I have a much better set than just my poorly lit, awful studio here. But it's really neat because now it's video and that's monthly. And then my friend Lisa Brandt, who did radio forever, same as me, we're born like 12 days apart. We are like sisters, but hopefully have differing enough opinions to make it interesting. So then we started Gracefully and Frankly. I was just playing with names and I was thinking Grace and Frankie, Gracefully and Frankly, and that's where it came from. And in there, I also began a sleep podcast called Drift, which is now over 100 stories, over 250,000 downloads. And last night, this morning, at 2 a.m, I came up with a tagline. It says, just a minute, I'm going to find it. I'm so proud of this, Matt, and you're the first person that's going to hear it. Listen to this. Okay. Blah, blah, blah on Drift tonight. Drift with Erin Davis, sleep podcast, 100 plus stories await you for free. You're not dreaming yet.
Perfect.
You're not dreaming yet. And I'm not even looking it up to see if it's some pillow company. My God, what if it's a pillow guy? Anyway, but that's, I'm really proud of that one because it started really from me not being able to sleep at night, listening to calm stories and going, why am I not doing this? So there, 4 podcasts, just 3 now though. I'm cutting back.
Well, I took you to bed last night.
Oh, really? Oh, you were, Matt, you were the best last night.
Well, that may be why the slogan came up right when I was downloading your show. And I just wanted to actually just double check a number here because I think I just want to put it into context for listeners because I know a lot of people have been listening to the show. We're going on 8 years now.
Oh, wow.
And you've mentioned that you hit 250,000 downloads total. And this podcast, which has been going for 8 years, I know I keep these numbers. I keep these numbers here somewhere. So very
well,
boring.
You should. And Broadcast Dialogue has you right there. I mean, wow.
So this podcast has the same. We have 253,000 downloads since I started tracking it 8 years ago on PodTrack. But here you are with the same number of historical downloads in a shorter period of time. This is a huge audience for you. And there's a lot of people who need to get to sleep.
Yes, exactly. Wow. Well, congratulations to you. All right, Matt, it's on. Let's check in a year.
Well, listen, there's just radio there's not as many people in radio now who are going to be like looking for these stories, which is why we put podcast ones in there as well.
Yeah, I got to raise my chair here. Sorry. I was playing with things. I shouldn't be playing with things.
But I love the goal. The goal of your show, by the way, is to not get to the end of the show. And the goal of my show is to get people to the end.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, it's like this karmic turnaround. After years of waking people up when they wanted to be sleeping, I'm doing the exact opposite. And it's so gratifying. Oh, my God, I'm loving it. It's called Drift with Erin Davis Sleep Stories. And the Lisa Brandt one I've already said is Gracefully and Frankly. We are loving that. Because how often you get to talk with your best friend and just talk about anything? And it's like radio without the commercials, without the music, and just kind of the occasional swear word, but we never say the F-bomb because kids are around. And my grandson listens to it. He says, yeah, you're on Spotify. I said, what are you doing? He says, I listen to you and Miss Lisa up in my room. And I was like, that's Lauren's boy, you know? Listening to Grandma Banana on the radio, sort of.
What app do you use to listen to podcasts?
I am to listen. I listen on Amazon, on Prime. At night, what I listen to go to sleep is American History with Lindsey Graham. Just tell me a story. Not that Lindsey Graham, not Miss Lindsay. The one, he's a really good podcaster. I want to hear a story that is told well. I put it on 0.8, so it's slower. And then it's kind of boring. But and doesn't have commercials to wake you up and doesn't have a bunch of music. I mean, other than that, I love listening to Badlands and Hollywoodland and stuff and I would listen to Dateline, but they got too many. I listen to Dateline on my dog walks, but yeah. And of course you, Matt, I can't leave you out.
Well, I love you. I love that you listen to history because I am a history nut. And I will listen to history podcasts to go to sleep. But you are the very first person I've ever met who will listen to a podcast at a slower speed.
Well, that's to go to sleep. But, I listen to my news podcast a little faster, usually 1.2. But yeah, just more slowly to go to sleep. And then I don't have to really pay attention to the words so much because they're being fed to me just more gently. Yeah. I love podcasting. I came in hating it. I resented the hell out of it because I thought you're killing radio. And then I realized, no, this is making up for what radio could be, should be, and can't be. I mean, you could listen to Howard Stern I got a sister who listens to him constantly. And I always had this thing against him because of his misogyny, because of them putting him on Q107 in Toronto, when he didn't belong there. He wasn't local. But then you kind of go, wait, he is a great interviewer now that he's kind of off of the boobs and butts and stuff more. And he gets people to be honest with him. And you get stuff from him that you don't get anywhere else. So pay attention to that. And how can you do that? I love interviewing. Christ, I love talking. I'm so sorry to have been talking so much here, Matt.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there a program director who's telling us to wrap it up?
No.
That's good. No, listen. You mentioned Howard Stern. When people say, "Who do you love as interviewers?" It's Terry Gross, it's Howard Stern, and I'll throw in Dan Patrick because I like when Dan Patrick does interviews. My favorite sports person. The questions are short and he gets right to the point.
Yeah, I love that. The people who don't make the questions all about them unless it is for context. And you're really good at that, by the way. You really are. I feel so comfortable. I'm just going on and I'm so sorry. But when you get talking to me about communicating in radio, I just, thanks for coming to my Ed Talk, ED.
Why were you resentful of podcasting? Like, why would you look at it and go, this is taking all of radio? And radio used to be the one. It was always the Valerie Gellers that came in. We want to speak directly to the listener. We want to make it personal. Yeah. We want to make it feel like it's one-on-one. And now when people ask me about the difference between radio and podcasting, I say, well, radio, they talk at you, and podcasting, you talk to you. Yes.
I was resentful, partly, there was an ego thing that came in and said, wait a minute, I've done all this training, I've done all this slogging through crap, and you're just going to come on and do your little podcast, and it's going to be, I'm going to talk about, and so there was this ego in me that said, anybody can do this? Why? But then that's the beauty of it. I opened my eyes and said, get out of your own way. Anybody can do this. Anyone can be a good storyteller. Anyone has a story to tell. And that's what I used to love about biography. Remember when A&E was actually arts and entertainment? Oh, God, who's old? Get off my lawn. But in biography, you would go in there going, I couldn't care less about the guy who started Cadbury. And then you go, oh, this is really neat. Because if you tell a story well, it's like that break Valerie had you retool and make better. It's always going to be good. So that's the beauty of podcasting. And I resented it, Matt, because I thought it was going to take away from our radio audience. And again, never give them a reason to change the channel or to find something else. And the more that we, found the stuff that they were making us do that was so inane, like the all music hour at 8 a.m. with no commercial, but no talk, no hosts. And it was just so stupid. And it happened around 9/11. They did that to us. The night of 9/11, that program director phoned me and said, well, everything that's been said about it it's already been said. So let's just go back to our regular programming tomorrow. When the rule, the Valerie Geller rule was, is my world safe? You needed to hold people's hands and tell them the stories, and we weren't allowed to do that. Podcasting said, here, and then came in and told the stories. And it's just amazing. I love it now. I love it. It gives me an outlet and keeps me busy. I love it.
It's amazing. And you know what? I'm so glad you took the time before your trip that you're about to take.
Yeah.
I actually don't want to mention that in the podcast because I don't want to let people know that your house is vacant.
Oh, that's okay. We've got tenants.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time just before you head off down south for a few weeks of hopefully some wonderful sunshine.
Yeah, going to California, I'm very picky about where I go now. They've changed their open carry laws, which kind of helps. But yeah, every place is a little bit insane. But I'm taking, Rob and I are taking our son-in-law and his wife, our daughter-in-law. That's, it's a weird family dynamic, but it works. And our 2 grandkids, and we're going down and they're going to do Super Mario World, and we'll get on a hop-on, hop-off bus, or I don't know, go see Jimmy Kimmel or something. I don't know. My days of they Disney'd that out of me when I was in the radio station. We had to work for the mouse really hard, like a rented mule. And so we're just going to enjoy. It won't be warmer than it is here in the Victoria, BC area, but we'll have a really neat experience.
Thank you so much for doing this. It's so good to meet you finally.
Oh, Matt, thank you. Meeting you and being able to talk to your audience one-on-one. It just means the world to me, and I'm so grateful to you for asking. Have a wonderful, and I know we're well into the year now, but I never get tired. Oh, a happy Lunar New Year. Now I can say that.
There you
go. Year of the Dragon. Way you go.
The Sound Off Podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Edited by Chloe Emo Lane. Social media by Aiden Glassy. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.